The Wyoming night howled like a living beast. Snow ripped across the plains, smothering sound and sight. The wind clawed at the world, bending the naked trees and driving the cold through every crack of wood and bone. Jake Morrison stood by his cabin window, watching the storm twist and snarl against the pale light of his lantern. His breath fogged the glass as he squinted into the white void outside. Then a shape moved, a shadow, staggering, falling. For a moment he thought it a trick of wind and moonlight. He blinked once, twice. It didn't rise. A pulse of unease crawled through him. Grabbing his lantern and his coat, Jake pushed through the door into the blizzard. The cold bit through the seams of his gloves, slicing at his skin. Snow stung his eyes as he trudged toward the collapsed figure, half buried in the drift. He knelt, brushing away frozen layers until a pale face appeared beneath the ice. A woman, barely breathing, lips blue, lashes crusted white. He hesitated only a heartbeat before lifting her light as a ghost into his arms. Behind him, the wind erased his footprints, devouring them as though he'd never been there. Inside, the cabin filled with the crackle of fire and the scent of smoke and pine sap. Jake slammed the door, shutting out the shrieking cold. The air trembled with the sound of his quick breath as he laid her near the fire. He worked fast, peeling the frozen layers from the woman's trembling body. His rough hands clumsy yet careful. Her fingers were scarred, her cheeks hollowed by hunger and wineburn. He poured whiskey between her lips, the amber liquid trembling as it touched her mouth. She coughed, weak but alive. He rubbed her arms, her shoulders, trying to summon heat back into her. When her lashes flickered, Jake leaned closer and froze. He knew that face. He knew it too well. Years ago, he'd seen it framed in the orange glow of firelight and ruin. His throat tightened as memory clawed up from the dark corners of his mind. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the fire too bright. He whispered her name like a ghost afraid to speak. Catherine Henley. His hand shook as he reached for the whiskey again, swallowing hard. Some souls, he thought, were never meant to return. 15 years peeled away like bark from a burning tree. Willowbrook Jake's past roared inside his skull. He could still smell the smoke, the hay, the sharp scent of oil and ash. He'd lit the barn that night under Harrison's orders, a job he told himself was just business. Flames had twisted high against the sky, gold and black and screaming. His brother, Thomas, had run back inside for a locket of small silver charm that carried everything pure in their family. Jake had shouted, begged him to stop, voice breaking under the roar. Then came the explosion, swallowing sound, brother, and mercy all at once. The fire burned through Jake's conscience for years, a flame he could never quench. Now, staring at Catherine's unconscious face, he saw the past reborn in flesh and snow. She'd been there too. She'd seen it happen. She'd watched everything die. Maybe she'd come for revenge. Maybe she'd come for salvation. He didn't yet know which would be worse. The fire hissed as the wind rose again, rattling the shutters like fists on a coffin lid. Outside, hooves thudded faintly through the storm, slow, deliberate, drawing nearer. Jake moved to the frosted window, lantern raised. 3 riders materialized through the veil of snow, their silhouettes sharp against lightning flashes. The lead man dismounted, his badge glinting when lightning lit the white world. Sheriff Creena Harrison's bulldog, the kind of man who could smell fear through smoke. Jake's pulse quickened. He turned toward the sleeping woman, her lips twitching in a fever dream. Catherine Henley, Creena's voice bellowed outside. "We know she's in there." Jake's lantern flickered as if the wind itself feared the sheriff's words. A bounty, a trap. He gritted his teeth. This wasn't his fight anymore, but fate, cruel and stubborn, didn't care what he wanted. He reached for the revolver resting by the table. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one gathering inside his chest. Catherine's eyes snapped open at the crunch of boots on snow. "You're supposed to be dead," she rasped, her voice brittle as frost, staring straight at Jake. He met her gaze, equally haunted, the years between them collapsing like burned pages. "Makes 2 of us." Her eyes filled with something between fear and relief. "They'll kill you for helping me," she whispered. Jake didn't answer. He just checked the revolver's cylinder, then the window. From outside, Creena's growl rumbled again. "Fugitive Catherine Henley, $1,000 reward." She flinched, clutching her coat tight to her chest. "You don't understand, Jake. Harrison paid you to burn Willowbrook. But I have proof now." The words froze him where he stood. She pointed weakly at her coat. "It's sewn inside." Jake tore through the seams with shaking hands, pulling out a packet of crumpled papers. The truth, when it came, was heavier than any bullet he'd ever chambered. He unfolded the brittle pages one by one. Each was stamped, sealed, and damning bank records, forged deeds, letters carrying Harrison's unmistakable signature. Catherine's eyes gleamed with defiance despite the tremor of exhaustion in her voice. "Copies went to the Denver Marshal and the Rocky Mountain News," she said. "Kill me if you want the story still prints tomorrow." Outside, the porch groaned under the weight of boots. The door creaked and splintered beneath fists and fury. Jake's mind raced, his guilt fighting with something older duty. He'd spent a decade hiding from his sins, but the truth he'd buried was now alive, breathing fire through his cabin. Catherine looked at him steadily, her voice quiet but sharp. "You lit that fire once, Jake. Maybe now it's time you light another." The door burst open with a crash that scattered embers across the floor. Snow and wind swirled inside like ghosts of the dead. Sheriff Krenaugh stepped in first, gun drawn, eyes full of cold authority. "Both of you dead fugitive, dead rancher. Clean story, easy bounty." His deputies fanned out behind him, rifles steady. Catherine rose slowly, clutching the papers in both hands though her body trembled. "Bet your empire on my bluff, Sheriff," she hissed. The fire's reflection burned in her eyes, fierce and unbroken. For a long moment, Krenaugh hesitated. The papers between them seemed to hum with danger, a fuse ready to spark. Jake's voice cut through the silence like a shot. "Get out." Krenaugh's jaw clenched, the tension thick as smoke. Then, slowly, he lowered his gun. "This isn't over," he muttered, turning toward the door. "It never is," Jake said. The lawmen disappeared into the storm, their shapes swallowed by the white beyond. The wind screamed one last time, then fell quiet. Silence returned, thick and heavy as the snow outside. Jake dropped into his chair, exhaustion carving deep lines across his face. The cabin smelled of smoke, gun oil, and fear. Catherine knelt by the fire, staring at the flickering flames as though they were speaking only to her. "What now?" Jake asked finally, voice low. She didn't turn. "We go to Denver," she said. "Testify. Burn Harrison's network to the ground." Jake's eyes drifted to the papers spread across the table, to the evidence that could cleanse or damn him. "Together?" he asked. She finally looked up, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "Together." For the first time in years, the fire inside him felt warm instead of cruel. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving only the whisper of wind and the promise of morning. Months later, the courtroom buzzed like a hive under sunlight. Reporters crowded the benches, ink pens scratching furiously as testimony spilled like blood. Jake stood beside Catherine, his head held tight in both hands, sweat tracing his jaw despite the chill of the room. The judge called for silence while papers piled higher than pride. Harrison's empire of deceit crumbled piece by piece under the weight of truth. Gasps rippled when Catherine revealed the forged deeds, the payments, the murders masked as justice. And when Jake took the stand, confessing his own sin-burning Willowbrook, the room went still as stone. Redemption doesn't erase the past, but sometimes it rewrites the ending. When the verdict fell, chains clinked on the wrists of the powerful. Catherine exhaled, trembling, while Jake simply closed his eyes. The sound of justice, at last, was quieter than he'd imagined. Years later, peace settled over the land like soft snow. A small ranch outside Denver glowed beneath a pale blue sky, the fields gold with morning light. Children's laughter drifted through the open air, echoing off the hills where the wind once screamed. Jake mended a fence near the pasture, his movements slow but steady, the lines of his face softened by time. On the porch, Catherine rocked gently, a blanket across her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Around her neck hung Thomas's silver locket, catching sunlight in its worn surface, a reminder of everything lost and everything earned. Jake joined her, leaning on the railing beside her. "Still think redemption's real?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly, eyes bright with the kind of peace that comes only after storms. "Salvation," she said. "Sometimes where's damnation's face?" He smiled back, and the wind moved through the fields like an old friend. The plains stretched wide and golden before them, and at last the ghosts were quiet.